Hello everyone. I'm very pleased to present you my research titled The Architectural Heritage of Tobacco Production in Dalmatia, which was also the topic of my master's thesis in art history at the University of Vienna. This study explores the architectural and urban aspects of tobacco production under the Austrian state monopoly. Throughout today's talk, I will guide you through several case studies, Imotski, Sin, Dubrovnik, and Metković, and we will see how their design and layout evolved over time. You will also see several original archival drawings and plans that I came across during my research. Unlike previous studies, which were mostly focused on the economic or agricultural aspects of tobacco production, this research is centered on its architectural dimension, on the origins and the ways in which these complexes were organized, designed, and styled. At the center of the research are these four tobacco complexes. Each was analyzed in terms of its urban role, its spatial layout, and its architectural design. And the research also looks at reference examples from Vienna, where the designs for administrative buildings and warehouses were centrally planned. And this helps explain why certain design principles repeat and why we can trace similarities to the main tobacco factory in Ottakring. And finally, another important focus of the study is stylistic diversity of the administrative buildings. They clearly show influence of Austrian villa architecture around 1900, especially elements of the Heimat style, which connects to the idea of the so-called governance of style. Also, my work is based on extensive archival research, which I conducted in the Austrian State Archives in Vienna, the State Archives in Dubrovnik and Zadar, and the local museum in Imotski. And the material presented here includes previously unpublished archival sources. Here we can see the position of Dalmatia with the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. I like to start with this map because it helps us situate the story geographically and politically. So from 1814, Dalmatia was a crown land, and from 1870, it bore the title Kingdom of Dalmatia. The province initially belonged to the Austrian Empire, and after the compromise with Hungary, it became part of the Austrian half of the dual monarchy. On this slide, we can see the main historical framework that shaped the development of the tobacco monopoly. So with the establishment of the Josephine monopoly in 1784, tobacco production in the Austrian Empire was for the first time organized under the direct state supervision. At the same time, in Venetian Dalmatia and the Republic of Dubrovnik, tobacco cultivation and trade were already present in 17th century. And after the fall of the Venetian Republic in 1797, the region went through a period of wars and instability, which ended with the Congress of Vienna in 1815, when Dalmatia once again came under Habsburg rule. And in 1817, the Kingdom of Dalmatia was established, encompassing the territories of the former Republic of Dubrovnik and the Bay of Kotor. The region, particularly its hinterland, was economically underdeveloped and politically unstable, and in this context, tobacco production became not only a means of economic progress, but also an instrument of political control and social reform. Tobacco cultivation began in Imotski region in the 1880s. And after its initial success, it gradually spread to other parts of Dalmatia. So by the beginning of the 20th century, there was already a well-organized network of tobacco stations across Dalmatia, and they were all connected through Vienna's administrative system. Here we can see the general layout and positioning of the tobacco complexes. So as this slide shows, all of them were built on the urban periphery, usually on open ground and close to the main roads or rail connections. And the sites were easy to access for transporting tobacco, yet clearly separated from the residential parts of town. And each complex followed the pavilion layout with buildings arranged according to their function. So you had warehouses, administrative and auxiliary buildings, and all the supporting infrastructure, each with its own defined space. And as you can notice in the photos, the main facade of the administrative building always faced the street, serving as the public representative image of the entire complex. I will show that later also. And this standardized approach, both spatially and symbolically, made the tobacco station easily recognizable as part of the state monopoly network, even in smaller provincial towns. So here we come to the warehouses. On this slide, we can see the first generation of tobacco warehouses designed by the architect August Stara between 1888 and 1899. August Stara was born in Königsberg, today's Kaliningrad. It is assumed that he completed his education in his hometown and then he came to Split in the mid-19th century, and he was active throughout Dalmatia. In all analyzed complexes, the warehouses were the first buildings to be constructed. They are easy to recognize by their elongated shapes, stone constructions, and pinched roofs. And when we look at the drawings and photographs, we can see the rhythm of simple arched openings with brick lintels, creating a sense of repetition that was typical of late 19th century industrial design. And the earliest warehouses had a traditional load-bearing system consisting of two rows of cast iron columns and wooden floor structures. So here we see how August Stara managed to combine local building traditions with modern construction methods of his time and creating a very recognizable architectural language that would later evolve even further. Like here we see the next phase in the development of the tobacco warehouses designed by Edward Jagar in the early 20th century. So Edward Jagar graduated from the School of Construction in Zagreb, specialized at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, and worked in Split. These buildings clearly mark a shift toward a more modern and technically advanced approach. And compared to Tara's earlier warehouses, there is an increase in volume. We see additional floors, the use of reinforced concrete frame, and continuous rhythm of large windows with brick arches. And now we move on the administrative buildings, which were designed with much greater attention to architectural detail and representation. Here we see the earliest example, buildings also designed by August Stara around 1894 in Imotski and Vrgorac. The administrative building in Imotski is characterized by refined utilitarianism and strict axial symmetry of the facade, with a central risalit featuring paired windows connected by a shared brick lintel called bifora. And this identical design concept with central risalit on both longitudinal facade is repeated in the building in Vrgorac. So these early administrative buildings already show how the state tried to communicate authority and stability through architectural form. On this slide, we can see two of the most representative administrative buildings, the ones in Sin and Dubrovnik in Gruž, both built between 1897 and 1898. Interestingly, both structures display almost identical floor plan dimensions, mass composition, and structural characteristics. The interior layout is also organized in the same way, with office and residential areas designated for the technical staff and the manager. And the buildings are based on rectangular floor plan with three-part division, where the central bay projects beyond the perimeter walls, forming a risalit on both the front and the rear facades. So these examples show a clear evolution in design compared to Tara's work. And here the composition becomes more complex and monumental, combining neo-Renaissance and Heimat style elements. And if you look at the facades, you can see how they are divided into three horizontal zones, with the piano nobile, or the main floor, emphasized by larger, richly framed windows. And this visual hierarchy immediately gives the building a sense of authority and importance. Another interesting feature is the combination of stone and exposed brick, something quite rare in Dubrovnik's architectural tradition. And one more thing, originally both buildings had balconies and verandas, which unfortunately no longer exist today. Now we come to the administrative building in Metković, which marks a new stage in development of these complexes. Although it was designed around 1905 and completed a few years later in 1909, it already looks much more modern compared to the earlier examples. So at first glance, the Metković building might seem simpler, but it is actually very innovative for its time. It keeps the same typological layout as the earlier station, with a central staircase and symmetrical organization. Yet it introduces modern materials such as reinforced concrete floors, which was quite progressive for provincial architecture at the beginning of 20th century. And here in Metković begins to show proto-modern features, emphasizing structure, proportion, and functionality over decoration. Here we can see another interesting example, the canteen building in Imotski, built in 1903. Architecturally, it is an impressive example in which history's tradition intertwines with Heimat style influences, and visible is in the use of wooden elements and decorative gable grids, which lend the building an additional expressive character. Its architecture was inspired by Austrian villas in Semmering region, most evident in the expressive main facade. Particularly notable are the porch and the representative staircase, which branches symmetrically from the center toward the ground floor, and in this way a clear compositional axis is created, further emphasizing the entrance and the ceremonial character of the building's approach. Here we see the main tobacco factory in Vienna's Ottakring district, the main reference point for all Dalmatian tobacco complexes. And as I already mentioned, all the Dalmatian projects were designed in Vienna under the General Directorate of the Tobacco Monopoly, so this factory serves as an important example. It's known for its innovative technical solution and as a key work of Grundzeit, industrial architecture. Although much larger in a scale, it shares many features with the Dalmatian complexes. You can notice similar principles, a peripheral urban location, a pavilion layout, and symmetrical spatial organization. Its neo-Renaissance facades, typical of Viennese historicism in the late 19th century, give the building a monumental appearance. And now we have warehouses of the main tobacco factory in Ottakring. They were completed in 1894. The warehouse in Ottakring was a three-story building with a longitudinal floor plan that allowed for lateral extensions. It featured a three-part layout, and the central section formed risolites. The ground floor housed offices and technical departments, while the upper floors were used for storing cigars and tobacco. The structure was based on double-row skeletal system of cast iron columns combined with wooden beams. The designs adopted key Renaissance elements such as rustication, subordination, axiality, and rhythmically arranged risolites. They were architectural expressions of state authority and institutional power. And if we look closely, the buildings in Sin and the canteen in Imotski are particularly interesting examples because they combine the representational language of historicism with folk-inspired motifs from Austrian architecture, a combination typical of the Heimat style. At the same time, these elements were very much part of conscious stylistic program, what we might call the governance of style. And this means that the appearance of these buildings wasn't left to chance. It was carefully planned to convey values like discipline, progress, and national identity all through architecture. Here again, we have the administrative building in Dubrovnik. At first glance, you can notice that its composition and materials differ slightly from the inland examples like Sin or Imotski. And the facade here shows a much stronger Italian Renaissance reflection, which isn't surprising given Dubrovnik's long architectural tradition. And one of the closest parallels is the Crjević-Pucić summer residence, which shares similar window frames and comparable facade organization. At the same time, the building still follows the visual logic of the state monopoly. It's symmetrical and monumental in its presence. So even though it visually blends into Dubrovnik's architectural environment, it still clearly communicates state authority through its form and materials. And in this way, the Dubrovnik Gruž building acts almost like a bridge connecting the local Renaissance tradition with Austrian stylistic influences and translating the centralized architectural language of Vienna into the cultural context of Dalmatia. And here we return once again to Metković to take a closer look at its administrative building within the concept of the governance of style. As we can see in the images, this building represents a more advanced technical solution within the Dalmatian network of tobacco complexes. It maintains the same functional and typological principles as earlier station, a clear symmetry, a central axis, and strong urban frontage, but visually it moves in a new direction. So the design is simplified, the facade ornamentation is minimal, and the focus shifts to proportion, structure, and material. This restrained approach reflects the broader architectural transition toward modernism, which was beginning to take hold in the early 20th century. And technically, the building is also quite advanced. It uses concrete floors and the material construction systems executed by company Pittel und Brauswetter, the same firm that later built the Loos House in Vienna. So we can clearly see how innovations from the imperial capital were being applied even in relatively small provincial towns like Metković. And on this final slide, we can see how the typology of tobacco warehouses developed and evolved over time. A clear hierarchy among the buildings is typical of Dalmatian tobacco complexes. The administrative buildings, more elaborate and representative than the utilitarian ones, reflect the social divide between the administration and the workers. At the same time, the presence of Heimatschutz elements suggests that the national message was embedded with this spatial and functional distinction, one linked to the German-speaking administrative structures of the time. And today, these tobacco complexes stand as silent witnesses of a vanished industrial era. Although tobacco production in Dalmatia ended in the 1950s, the buildings still hold a great historical, architectural, and cultural value. And they tell the story of how architecture served as a tool of governance, modernization, and identity, even in the peripheries of the monarchy. And with this research, I hope to contribute to a better understanding of this unique industrial heritage and to encourage its future preservation and revitalization. Thank you very much for your attention.